Hey everybody, welcome to Money's No Object. I'm your host, Dylan Howell. This is episode number 53 of our YouTube channel and podcast, and I could not be more excited to continue sharing with you all personal finance topics that I think are going to help you in your financial life and help you to push towards financial freedom with the most speed and intensity that you can. Today, what we're going to talk about is not being house poor. The home or mortgage payment or rent payment or whatever it may be, any type of housing cost that you have can be the biggest expense that you have. Very typically, it is the biggest expense that you have. And so I don't want these expenses to drag you down financially. So today we're going to talk about how can we keep those expenses as low as possible? What decisions do you make that will allow you to do so? And how we can build financially off of the fact that our housing costs are low while we still have substantial housing costs. Before we get started though, if you could go down below, hit the big red subscribe button. Also, like this video, leave me any feedback down below in the comments or any questions that you have. I'd be glad to answer them or respond to you down there in the comments. If you're listening to this on Apple or Spotify podcasts, I appreciate you doing so. Just make sure that you subscribe to this show and leave me any review and feedback that you can there. Also, if you would like, follow me on social media at MNO with Dylan. That's a really good follow, and it will allow you to get all these little financial tips and tricks that I'm putting out daily that will really help you in your long-term financial journey. Also, if you want me to help you build a financial plan for you one-on-one, I can definitely help you do that. Just go to my website, www.mnowithdylan.com, and click on the Work with Dylan tab, and you can pick the financial coaching session that is right for you there. So today we're talking about these costs, these housing costs, and how we want to keep them low. And so a good place to start, I believe, would be with the budget. And so let's just talk for a moment and just have a quick refresher on how do we budget and what does a budget look like if you're following the way that I'm teaching you to do so. So there are two parts to any budget, and it's really, really simple. There's the income and there's the outgo or the expenses. So you have your income and you have all of your expenses. Now, the way that we're going to set that up as a budget is we are going to start with our income at the top. Okay, so we start with your income and then we work our way through anything that is an expense to us. So our giving is an expense that we do right off the top. Then we have all our fixed bills, our variable bills that we can budget for. We have saving and investing. We have all of these things that we will find in our budget and list each one specifically and each one with a conservative amount. So when I say conservative amount, I mean income should be rounded down if you don't have a specific set monthly income, and your expenses should be rounded up in case your light bill's not the same every month, or your water bill's not the same every month, or things just vary over time. And so be conservative when you're making your budget. And if you have a variable income, then be conservative with your variable income in the same way that you were conservative with variable expenses. And at the end of the day, what you should have is a budget where you end with zero. Every dollar in your budget is assigned to something, and that something may be savings, so it may stay in your bank accounts, but every dollar has been assigned, and it has a place that it's supposed to go throughout the month, and then you can just track that budget throughout the month and make adjustments as needed. But we want to have that budget in place, and if we are budgeting correctly, one thing that we are going to see that heavily impacts our budget is our housing costs. And so that's why I wanted to start there today, because one of the biggest just impactors of the budget is the home mortgage or the rent that you're paying. So how much can a mortgage really impact your budget? Well, I just went with some numbers that I pulled from the internet that I think are really useful statistics that you can use as kind of a baseline just to see how much your income can be eaten away by housing costs. So the median household income in the United States is $62,000 a year, okay? And the median home mortgage, and the median cost of a home, is about $200,000 a year, okay? So if that median family were to buy that median home and they did so on a 30-year mortgage, which I've said before I'm not a big fan of, and I'll talk more about later this week, but let's say they did it on a 30-year mortgage, say they did it with a 4% rate, and it's that $200,000 loan, that payment is $954.83 per month, okay? So that would be your house payment. That's not including taxes and insurance. That's just principal and interest. So it's actually a bit more than that. But we'll stick with that number for now because that's a rounded down number, and I'm fine with that. Okay, then let's say with a $62,000 income, okay, that between your state and federal taxes, let's say you paid 20% in taxes, right? You were married filing jointly or something like that, and you ended up paying approximately 20% of that income in taxes, and then you had your deductions, whatever. So let's just say you took home $4,133.33 per month. Okay, and so if you took that home, that mortgage payment of $953.83 per month would be 23.1% of your take-home pay. And that doesn't even account, like I said, for taxes and insurance on that mortgage payment. And that doesn't say that you may be paying more taxes than that 20% that I just took out of that particular income. And that's not paying any extra on a 30-year mortgage, and it's not a 15-year or less mortgage like I like you to have. So all of these things are saying that these housing costs can get out of control really, really fast, given even the median household income and the median housing costs. So what does this mean? This means we do need to live a bit lower than our means, especially with housing. Because what does this do to us? When we have real high housing costs, what does this do? It makes it to where other areas of our budget suffer. We can't invest as much. We can't give as much. We can't spend as much on things that we want to do. We suffer in other areas because we chose these high housing costs. And you may say, oh, well, I live somewhere where housing is just so expensive. And that's true. That's facts. But, Dave Ramsey says something to people that I think applies really well here. And it's like, you can't run from math. You're not exempt from doing math. You still have an income and you still have expenses for your housing costs. They have to be reasonable in order to make any traction towards your financial future. And this 23.1% of the person's take-home pay that we just talked about a moment ago is low compared to what most people have of housing costs as a percentage of their particular income. And so this is not something that is out of the ordinary, but what this does is it eats away their ability to build financial strength and push towards financial freedom because they're just spending all this money on housing. And rents are commonly even worse because rents typically are higher than the subsequent housing payment that you would be making. Yes, I know the costs overall, rent keeps costs lower because you don't have to do all the other things yourself over the long term. And so it can be smart for people who are trying to get out of debt, like I've said before. But the individual who's paying on the mortgage is actually, paying in equity to this particular home that they are going to own over the long term. And so either way, we're seeing that housing costs are just really, really high. And what happens is these mortgages and these rents, what they do is they play a short and a long-term role affecting your financial strength and your financial ability. In the short term, what happens is decreasing these costs will increase discretionary income. And so that's going to require you to do what? That's going to require you to decrease your payment in the short term. That's going to require you to buy cheaper housing in the short term. But in the long term, what happens is it will increase your discretionary income permanently. And the way that it's going to do that is by you paying your mortgage off eventually. Then you'll have permanent discretionary income that is greater, that you can do more things with. And so that will put you in a place of real financial strength. And so though they do play a drain on our income over time, we want decreasing our housing costs to increase our discretionary income in the short term and increase our permanent discretionary income over the long term. And so how in the world are you supposed to go about decreasing your housing costs? Well, these may be some ways for you. So first of all, buy or rent something you can afford. That's one of the biggest issues. And as simple as it sounds, what people do is they like to look around and say, I think I deserve to live in something like this, and I'm willing to pay, if it's even within my ability to do so, I'm going to pay for that thing because I like it. Not because I can afford it, because I like it. And they don't do the math, and they don't budget, and they don't make the decision based on some logical fact. What they make the decision on is based on feeling and wants. Just don't try to be keeping up with the Joneses when it comes to your home, or when it comes to your apartment, or when it comes to whatever you're doing housing wise, because what's going to happen is you're going to end up in a place where you can't pay for things that you need to pay for, or you can't do things that you want to do because you owe so much on your housing every month, and it makes your budget so tight. Or maybe you don't have a budget at all, and that's a problem in and of itself. But don't try to keep up with the Joneses, because you will always lose. It will always leave you empty. It's not a winning proposition. And you definitely could have to move. You could have to get out of the place that you're currently living and move down in housing. And there's no shame in that, because guess what? Now you actually have money to do the things that you need to do over the long term, and not just be constantly just slugging away at barely making your housing costs every single month. And then you may say, well, I make a really good income, so I can buy really expensive housing. Well, that's not necessarily the case either, because guess what happens when you buy something that is more than you can afford, whether or not you have a lot of money or not? That income goes away. That income's gone. You can't do things with that income that you should be able to do. And so having some guidelines as to how you go about buying something, how you go about renting something that is within a specific range of percentage of your income is a very, very important thing to do. And I'll talk here shortly about what my suggestion is for you as to how you should go about doing that. Another way that you can decrease housing costs, and this is actually a really, really big one if you're purchasing a home, is to save up a big down payment first. Now, this will allow you to do a couple things. You can actually buy a home maybe a little more than you could have afforded with a lower down payment, because you will be financing less of that big home than you would have been previously, and thus decreasing your costs. Also, putting a larger down payment can allow you to get out of PMI, private mortgage insurance. And if you get out of PMI, then you have less costs on top of having that lower payment. And so you can really decrease your housing costs just simply by saving up more before you ever decide to jump into a home. Large down payments are hard to come by, but they can save us thousands of dollars in interest over the long term if you just take the time and decide to be patient and do so before you go about purchasing your first home or your next home. And then another way that you can decrease housing costs as a percentage of your income naturally is increase your income. Now, this is the other side of the equation, because there's two sides of the equation, right? The two sides are you have your income and you have your outgo. We talked about that at the very beginning. We talked about budgeting, right? And so what we're looking at here is we're looking at the income portion. And we're saying, well, if we don't want too much housing costs as a percentage of our income, then what we can do is we can increase our income, and then our housing cost is a lower percentage of our income. And so if you want to live in a high cost area, you want to live somewhere nice, then get to grinding, get to making more money, get to doing more with your career. And I know it's easier said than done, but if you're so dead set on doing that, then make sure you're doing the right things to get you to that place. And you're going to have to make more money to allow yourself to afford something in a higher cost area if you're currently not making an income that will allow you to do so. At the end of the day, the income by itself doesn't make its decision for you. You don't decide based on just your income. That's a huge contributing factor, but it's got to be paired with those expenses, and you have to see what the housing expenses as a percentage of your income are and whether or not you can afford that given the other things that you want to do financially. It's different for just about everybody, but there are some really common small rules that you can try to follow that can, for most people, allow you to do the most financially over the long term. And so I'll give you a couple of those suggestions right now. So now the suggestions I have to keep you from becoming house poor are the following. So first of all, calculate your home payment, your house payment, your mortgage payment before you purchase the home. Too many people they're surprised by the payment, and they feel like they're oh, well, yeah, I could pay for that if I need to, whatever, but they're not sure, they're not solid on the fact that, oh, I can definitely pay for that. That's definitely within the bounds. No, there's too much ambiguity there. You can use my amortization calculator on my website, www.mnowithdylan.com, and click on the Tools for You tab, and there's a amortization calculator that will allow you to calculate what your payment would be given different interest rates and different mortgage values and all these types of things. And that will allow you to have a better idea and make a better plan before you go about purchasing something that you just can't afford. And then, know what your costs will be, and you won't be surprised by the money that you don't have later. So, if you know what your costs are, you'll know how much money you should have at the end of each month. And that should be the case if we are budgeting. I mean, at the end of the day, just don't be ignorant. Don't not know what's going on. Know what's going on and be able to do it, and purchase something. Or if you're renting, you can rent something that is reasonable and that is smart for you and your family. Then my next suggestion is something that I touched on a moment ago, and that's make your down payment as big as possible. If we can get to 20% to keep from PMI, then perfect. Do that. If you can just make it as big as possible to decrease your housing costs and decrease the amount of interest you're going to pay over the long term, absolutely do that. And if by some stroke of luck, you can pay in cash. I don't know how, I'm not asking. But if you have the cash to pay for a home, if you have the cash to pay for what you want to live in, then absolutely pay in cash. Just do it. I know most of you can't. That's not something that I want to push on you to try to do. But if you can do it, man, think about how that opens up your income over the long term. Because, and I'm talking about people who have, investments that can pay for it or savings that can pay for it, but just do it. Don't allow those savings or investments to sit there while you're paying on a mortgage. Just pay it off, pay for it immediately, and then your housing costs are almost zero. You have insurance and taxes and any repairs, but other than that, that's it. And then here's the big one, because I said we need to set something as a percentage of our income to determine how we want to go about purchasing something or whether or not we will purchase or rent something. So I suggest that your house payment or rent be no more than 25% of your take-home pay. Now let's break this down for a second. Why did I pick 25%? Well, what have I said before? I've said that I want you to be investing 15% of your income. I've said that, right? I've said that when you're getting to this point where you are purchasing a home and you're paying off your home and all these things, then you should be investing at least 15% of your income. That's in the financial action plan. So there's 15% of your income gone right there. And then I say, or God says, to give at least 10% of your income, right? So that's kind of a rule of thumb, the tithe. And so if you're giving 10% and investing 15%, well, that puts you that's 25% of your income. Okay, so we're kind of getting a little higher there. But if you take that 25 along with 25% on housing, well, that still leaves you with 50% of your take-home pay for all other things. Now, this can typically work. This can almost always work. You can make it on 50% of your take-home pay. It may not for some people, but that may mean that there's a lack of income there or just too much in other expenses that aren't absolutely necessary. And then, anything that exceeds this 25% on housing costs, the budget starts to get tight. The budget starts to get to where you don't have as much to do the things that you wanted to do otherwise. And that's a tough thing to reconcile with. That's a tough thing to play with. And obviously investing 15%, you can invest more. 10% of giving, you can give more. You don't have to have 50% of your income left over to do with as you please and pay all your other bills. No, it can be less than that if that covers what you need it to cover. And so I figured that, just so you know a couple things, just so you know, one, I'm being honest with you and telling you what should actually happen based on what I am doing, then I want to be a little more transparent here. I'm not giving you dollar values of anything. All I'm giving you is percentages and saying, okay, as a percentage of mine and my wife's take-home income, right, what are we doing with those incomes and how much of that is going towards housing? So our housing cost is 15.5% of our take-home pay. This could for sure be higher. We could for sure live somewhere where it was higher. But we keep it to a manageable portion of our take home pay so we can save, invest, give more. And then we have planned giving of about 12.5% of our income. And I say planned because then there's my discretionary giving that we can do out of money that we have left towards the end. But that is the planned giving monthly. That's what we have. And then saving and investing. So, savings that we want to put away, as well as the investments that we have all together is about 31.6% of take home pay. So you see, we've kind of stacked on in that area, and being young, it's a smart thing to do to stack on in that area. So we've done that, and this leaves 40.4% of our income, 40.4% for bills. We don't have debt, right? So see, that's a big deal. If you have debt, there's another reason that you don't want to have debt when you're owning a home, because that 50% of your income that we were talking about that you have for bills and discretionary spending, that now has to go towards debt payments too. And so it gets the budget tighter and tighter. And so we don't have debt. And so our budget doesn't have to be tight, right? So we have 40.4% of our income for bills and buying or paying for things that we want, and giving from our discretionary income as well. And so it leaves so much room when you can decrease your housing costs. Ours were 15.5% of take home pay. Well, 15.5%, that leaves you a lot of room to be able to do the things that you want to do over the long term. And so, if we had debt, this would be a really tight budget. If we had, 30% in housing costs, it'd be a tight budget. And I know that some people live in higher cost areas, and I understand that. That's just the nature of things sometimes. But that tells me that you need to make bigger down payments. That tells me that you need to do more due diligence. And you may just need to live below your means for a little while you build up to the time that you can make a big down payment on something that is something you want to live in and that you can actually afford. And so ultimately, what keeping costs low does for us is we have a higher propensity for generosity. Because if we have our low housing costs, then I can look around and say, I have more discretionary income. I can be more generous. I can give more money in all of these places. And that's fantastic. That's something that you want to be. That's something you want to have, is more discretionary income to give from. It also creates the ability to build wealth at a higher rate. Like I said earlier, our rate of saving and investing is what it is because our housing costs are what they are. We wouldn't be able to save and invest those amounts if our housing costs weren't what they were. There would be a trade-off that had to happen there, right? And so we would prefer to be building and not having to pay more for no particular reason, right? So you're building with the savings and investing, and that's just going to do you a lot of good over the long term. That's going to allow for good wealth building over the long term. And then this will also allow you to purchase the things you want to purchase without worrying about the guilt or the shame or the debt that may come across with purchasing something. And what does all of this just come back to? It allows you to be financially balanced. It allows you to not overdo it in one place or the other, because ultimately what housing is, like if you're buying a house, you can call it an investment, but it's really comfort. It's really spending. It's the spending portion of everything that you're doing, because you are spending money on living in this particular place. And so it gets you kind of out of whack if you're spending way too much money on that particular place, on that particular housing arrangement, because then you're spending a lot of money and you're not able to remain financially balanced with the saving, giving, investing type things that you are wanting to do maybe, or that you need to be doing. You're not able to do that because you are too heavy in the spending. You're too heavy in the housing costs. And so this all ties back to financial balance and the importance of having a balanced budget and being able to make these decisions for yourself over the long term. And so naturally what we find is keeping these costs low has a distinct impact on our ability to reach our financial goals. It has a distinct impact on our ability to build wealth and reach financial freedom, because the less that you're spending on housing, the more money you have to do other things. Okay. In a similar way to as I've talked about before with debt, when you don't have debt payments, then you can spend money elsewhere. The same is the case here. And I'm not saying to live in a dump. I'm not saying to live somewhere so cheap so you can just do all these things. No, live somewhere that's reasonable, right? I'm not saying to just cut your housing costs to nothing. I'm just saying be reasonable with your housing costs. And so many people are so unreasonable with their housing costs because they just think, oh, that's just the way it is. That's just how much it's going to cost. And they don't do their due diligence. They don't think it through. They don't think of it as a percentage of their income or something that they can afford. They just think of it in terms of want. That's why I talk about it as spending, because it's something that people want. You want a nice place to live. You don't have to have a nice house, or you don't have to live in a nice apartment or a nice condo or whatever you live in. You don't have to do that. You can just live somewhere that's reasonable, that's safe, that's a good place, it's clean, it's good enough, right? And that will push you towards financial freedom a lot faster, because you'll be able to do things that you weren't able to do paying those high costs that you would have been paying in the nice place. This is another place where we just justify, just like with vehicles, we justify housing in the same way, because we think, oh, we have to have we have to have this even though we can't afford this. Maybe we can afford this. That's what you need to be buying, okay? Now, don't get me wrong. If you can afford this, buy this. That's fine, okay? But if you can't afford this and you're paying for it right now, then you need to get out of that and buy something that is this. And so I just want to implore you to not justify, not play that justification game, and not let your housing costs get out of whack, because it will throw your budget off and not allow you to build wealth and push towards financial freedom as quickly as you could previously. At the end of the day, all I'm asking is that you can afford what you buy or rent. You can afford it. And if you can't, then that's going to bring a lot of trouble. So be able to afford it. And by affording it, I'm not talking about just be able to make the payments. No, be able to do what you want to do in your financial life and keep your percentages in balance, in order. And then that is truly being able to afford something. So hey guys, thanks for watching this video. If you could, go down below, hit the big red subscribe button, like this video, leave me any feedback in the comments. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify podcasts, make sure that you subscribe to the show there and leave me any review that hopefully it's a good review that you think that I'm doing well, or something that maybe I need to improve on. Just leave me a review there. Also, follow me on social media at MNO with Dylan, and I put out a lot of good stuff daily for you guys to see there. And then if you want to work one-on-one, if you want me to coach you financially, if you want me to help you build a financial plan for yourself that is tailored specifically to you, then go to my website, www.mnowithdylan.com, and you click on the Work with Dylan tab and pick the financial coaching session that you think would fit your situation the best. So tune in tomorrow as I talk about one of the biggest pitfalls out there, and that is the 30-year mortgage. So that's going to be a really, really interesting episode, and it's going to appeal to a lot of people who either are thinking about a 30-year or already have a 30-year, or may want to buy a home in the future. Whatever it is, this type of episode will appeal to a lot of people and keep you from one of these things that these lenders are just pushing time and time and time again. So thanks for tuning into this episode of Money's No Object. I'm your host, Dylan Howell. God bless.